Okay, this is a map of the downtown area where this particular project site is located. You see the project site outlined in white. You notice two different shadings on this property. The property itself is about 1.84 acres in size. The northerly, approximately 1/3 of the property is zoned R3, which is a multiple family residential zone. The southerly 2/3 of the property is zoned commercial. Now, the city's general plan requires that any project on property that exceeds 1 acre in size requires the adoption of a comprehensive plan or a specific plan before that project can move forward. It's been my experience that a comprehensive plan or a specific plan for a project property size of 1.84 acres is a little unusual, especially in a situation where you only have one use. But in this particular situation, because we have a split zone on this property, it actually works in our favor because the city can adopt a specific plan. Specific plans can be highly detailed. They can include development regulations that would overlay the existing underlying zoning of commercial and residential, because those two zones have their own development requirements, their own permitted uses, their own setback requirements, and so forth. So the fact that the city requires a specific plan for property of this size actually helps us, because it allows us to create a totally different and totally new regulatory framework to guide this project, which is specifically designed to address this type of facility and property of this size in this particular location. And the other advantage of the specific plan is that we can craft language in the specific plan so that it will apply only to a project such as this, an assisted living project, or a convalescent home, or a nursing home, or a project very similar to that. If for whatever reason the developer decides not to proceed with this project, then you still have the underlying commercial zone and the underlying residential zone in which to guide future developments. For example, if Mr. Shields and his development team decides, well, we're not going to go forward with this project, but another developer comes to the city 2 years later and wants to develop, let's say, a office use on the commercial component of this site, then you still preserve the underlying commercial zoning, which will regulate that development when that type of project is forward. Now, in addition to this specific plan, the city will require a conditional use permit. The zoning code currently requires, or actually allows, the development of a convalescent home, nursing home, or similar type of facility in any zone in the city, provided a conditional use permit has been approved. I don't know how many of you are familiar with conditional use permits, but they are discretionary applications that must be approved by the city in order for the use to move forward. It allows the city to impose conditions of approval on that use, performance standards on that use, so that use in the future does not become a nuisance to either the adjacent properties or to the neighborhood in general. In addition to the specific plan and the conditional use permit, the city must also process a general plan amendment. As I mentioned before, the zoning code currently allows assisted living projects or similar projects in any zone with a approval of a conditional use permit. However, on the general plan side, the general plan designation, commercial designation to guide 2/3 of the site is silent on these types of uses. So we must have language in the general plan which would make that permitted, again, provided there is a conditional use permit approved for the project. And then finally, the city will require a zoning code amendment. And the zoning code amendment is needed, and it's a technical issue, but the zoning code amendment is needed because we're adopting a specific plan which will have its own regulatory framework which will overlay the existing zoning of the property. And again, those regulations will only apply for a project of this type. And in order for that specific plan to take precedence over the underlying zoning, we need to have enabling language in the zoning code in order to move forward with that. I'm sorry, sir? Not the zoning of the property, but there needs to be specific language in the code which will allow the regulations of the specific plan to overlay the existing zoning. And again, it's only for the purposes of this project, because if this project doesn't happen for whatever reason, then we want that the existing underlying zoning to remain in place, just in case there's, again, there might be a project in the future that comes by and says, and they want to develop something on that commercial portion of the site. We need to have that underlying commercial zone still in place so that we can regulate that new use. I'm sorry.
Is that an action for the city council to happen?
Yes, and I'll go into that a little bit more, but all of these requirements here will go before the planning commission and the city council. I'll go into that a little bit further. Okay. Measure V. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Measure V. Measure V was a voter initiative that was passed a few years ago by the voters of the city of Sierra Madre, and it regulates development in the central core of Sierra Madre. There are 3 development requirements under Measure V. The first requirement is that no building in that central core can exceed a height of 2 stories. The other requirement, the second requirement, is that no building in the central core can exceed the height of 30 feet. In this particular case, for this project, the plans that have been submitted show that this project can indeed meet those requirements. And in fact, as Mr. Hendrickson had pointed out, the developer is proposing to lower the elevation of the site by 3.5 to 4 feet in order to further reduce the height of the building and reduce the massing of this building relative to the street frontage and to the adjacent properties. It is the third requirement that gives us a little more pause and a little more debate. And believe me, we've debated this for a number of months. And that requirement is the maximum density in the central core for residential projects is 13 units per acre. Now, how do we interpret 13 units per acre on a project that says 75 suites? These are bedroom suites, so some are 1-bedroom suites, some are 2-bedroom suites, some are studios type suites. They each have their own bathrooms, but none of these 75 units have their own kitchens. All the 75 units are dependent upon a common kitchen facility and common dining area. So if you look at it from that perspective, because typically most people think that the dwelling unit is one that has sleeping accommodations, has restroom facilities, has cooking facilities. If you look at it from that perspective, this whole building, 58,000 square feet, is 1 unit. Well, I don't think anybody believes that this is 1 unit. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, I don't think it's fair to say that there are 75 units in this facility because each of those 75 suites don't have a kitchen. So, after we've evaluated this project from various angles, it's our belief, at least for the present, that this particular requirement, because it is expressed in terms, the density is expressed in terms of dwelling units per acre, cannot fit this project. Because I don't think that when that particular language was formulated, that they had this particular type of project in mind. This is residential, but it's more institutional as opposed to a traditional type of residential project, which we use single family, condominiums, and apartments. But again, the jury isn't in on that particular question. That is what we view the project currently with regard to this particular requirement. And that's why we're having this meeting. We want to get your input. You folks might have a totally different perspective on how to interpret this 13 units per acre. Believe me, we banged our heads against the wall for 2 months and we couldn't figure it out how to implement this project. So, that is Measure B. Now, as far as the entitlement process for the project, as I mentioned earlier, or as everybody's mentioned, we're trying to get, one of the objectives for this meeting is to get your input, to hear your comments, your questions regarding this project, so that we can better prepare ourselves when we go to the Planning Commission. There is another process that Danny mentioned earlier, and that is the CEQA process, the environmental review process, which Laura Stetson from Global Ireland will speak to a little bit later. But in terms of the approval process, once the environmental review process, the environmental assessment has been performed on this project, the findings of that environmental assessment will be presented at a public hearing along with staff's evaluation of the project. First, the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on this item. That public hearing, by law, is required to be notified to all residents within 300 feet of the project site. So all those residents that live within 300 feet will get written notification of the public hearing. The city will also publish the public hearing notice in the paper. They will post this public hearing on their bulletin board in front of City Hall. They will post it on their website, and I believe the city also has a Facebook page, and those will be posted on their Facebook page. After the Planning Commission holds their public hearing, which all of you can attend and all of you can voice your opinions on this project, the Planning Commission will render a recommendation. That recommendation will go on to the City Council. The City Council also must hold a public hearing, which requires notification of all residents, again, within 300 feet of the project site, notice in the paper, posting in front of City Hall. The city staff will also post on their website and on their Facebook page. So that, in effect, is the entitlement process. If the City Council approves this project, they must adopt an ordinance in order to approve the zone shift